The argument about the house began while I was still breathing. I want you to understand the specific quality of this. I was not in a coma. I was not unconscious or drifting or past hearing. I was in the bed that had been my bed since 1979, in the room where I had slept beside my husband Raymond for 33 years until he died. And I was ill, genuinely ill, the illness that my physician had told me in March would not be reversible, and that would produce, in the months that followed, the specific and patient narrowing that terminal illness produces. But I was present. I was hearing every word. My son Gregory and my daughter Patricia had driven in from their respective cities on the Sunday that my physician described as the beginning of the acute phase. Gregory drove from Cincinnati. Patricia flew from Dallas. They arrived within 2 hours of each other on that Sunday afternoon, and they came into my bedroom with the warmth of adults who are frightened and who express the fear as care. The warmth had lasted through Sunday evening and into Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, when I had rested and was awake but not energetic, they were in the kitchen, and I could hear them through the open door. Gregory said, "The house is the primary asset. The real estate market in this neighborhood has been moving. If we sell within 60 days of..." He stopped. He started again. "If we sell soon, we catch the current pricing." Patricia said, "The account at Riverside Bank is in Mom's name only. We'd need the will to probate it, but the balance is..." She said a number. She had been checking the account. They came back into the bedroom at 4 o'clock. Whoa. They came back into the bedroom at 4 o'clock. They looked at me with the warmth that was still available on top of the Monday afternoon kitchen conversation. "Mom," Gregory said, "we should talk about your wishes while we can." I looked at him. "The house," Patricia said. "The accounts. You should tell us what you want to happen, so we can carry it out the way you'd want." I looked at her. "Mom." Gregory's voice had developed in the 30 seconds since Patricia's sentence, a quality I recognized. The quality of impatience that has been wrapped in the language of practicality. "Say something. Who are you going to leave the money to? Don't be silent like a corpse. We need to know." The specific phrase he used was "like a corpse." He was speaking to a woman in a terminal illness in the bed she would die in, and he compared her silence to the silence of a corpse. I looked at both of them for a moment. Then I closed my eyes. They interpreted the closing of my eyes as fatigue. I heard Patricia say, "Let her rest." I heard Gregory say, "We'll talk to her in the morning." I heard them go back to the kitchen. I lay in the bed with my eyes closed, and I thought, with the specific clarity that my illness had given me, the clarifying effect of finitude, which produces a sharpness of thought that health sometimes obscures, about what I had heard and what it heard, and what it meant and what I was going to do about it. I had already done most of it. The plan had been in place since April, but the Monday afternoon conversation was the confirmation that the plan was correct. My name is Helen Augusta Pemberton Reyes. I'm 78 years old. I am, as of the writing of this account, still alive, barely and diminishingly, but alive, and I am writing this account from my own bed in my own room with the specific urgency of someone who has things to say and who is running out of time in and I which to say them. This account is for whoever needs it when I am no longer available to explain myself. The plan began in March, when Dr. Venkata told me what the scans showed and what the showing meant. Dr. Venkata is a direct woman, which is what I had always wanted from a physician, and what I had found, in a decade of her care, she reliably provided. She told me the diagnosis, the prognosis, the options. The options were limited. The prognosis was terminal. The timeline was months rather than years. I drove home from the appointment by myself. I had driven to the appointment by myself, which Gregory and Patricia had both said I shouldn't do. And I had said that I was not yet at the stage where driving was dangerous and that I would ask for help when I needed it. The driving home from the appointment was the specific drive of a woman who has just received a terminal diagnosis and who needs the 40 minutes in the car to begin the processing. What I processed in the car was not primarily grief. The grief came later in the evenings in the specific quiet of the house that had been Raymond's and mine. And that was now only mine. In the car, I processed logistics. This is consistent with who I am. A woman who spent 28 years as a school principal who managed the logistics of a school of 600 students and 47 staff, who resolved conflicts and allocated budgets and made decisions under allocated budgets and made decisions under time pressure for the entire span of her professional life. Logistics is my response to difficulty. The logistics question the car presented was, what is going to happen to the things I have built, and who should they go to, and what is the mechanism? I had been thinking about this question for years, not with urgency, because the urgency requires the diagnosis, but with the specific background awareness of a person who is past 70 and who has watched her contemporaries deal with this question in various ways, some of them well and some of them poorly. The thinking had produced a preliminary picture. The diagnosis required me to convert the preliminary picture into a plan. The preliminary picture included Gregory and Patricia. The plan arrived at across the weeks of April as I continued to appear outwardly normal, while internally reorganizing everything did not include them. I want to be precise about why. Gregory Richard Pemberton Reyes is 51 years old. He is a project manager at a logistics company in Cincinnati, and he manages his professional life with the specific efficiency of someone who is good at his job and who has organized his personal life around the same efficiency metrics. He is organized and reliable, and his reliability has always been conditional. Available when the situation calls for a specific kind of competence, and absent when the situation calls for a different kind of presence. The different kind of presence was the kind that the preceding 5 years had called for. Since Raymond's death in 2018, the 5 years had produced specific demands. I had been ill twice with significant but recoverable illnesses. I had needed help with the house in specific ways. I had been lonely in the specific way of widowhood that requires not assistance but company. Gregory had provided assistance when assistance was needed, and had been absent when company was needed, which is a pattern that tells you something about the specific form of his affection. The first illness in 2019 was a respiratory infection that kept me home for 3 weeks. Gregory drove from Cincinnati on the first weekend and again on the third weekend. He did practical things. He went to the pharmacy, he cleaned the kitchen, he handled the 2 phone calls I had missed during the acute period. He was there for 4 days in total across 3 weeks of illness. Carol was there every day. The loneliness was not something that could be addressed by a weekend visit. It is the specific, continuous fact of a house that contained 2 people for 43 years, and that now contains 1, and the one experiences the absence in every room, and at every meal, and at every meal, and in every evening when there is no one across the table. The loneliness required not intervention but presence, and Gregory's form of presence is interventionist rather than companionate. Patricia Caroline Pemberton Reyes is 47 years old. She is a marketing director in Dallas, and she is the child who had always been more similar to me in temperament. The quick mind, the preference for directness, the organizational intelligence, and who had therefore been the child I had expected, and who had therefore disappointed me more specifically than Gregory had. Patricia had called once a week for the first year after Raymond died. She had called twice a week in the 6 weeks after his death. She had called once a week for the year after. She had been calling once every 2 weeks by the second year, and the calls had diminished from there, not dramatically but incrementally. In the way that the maintenance of a relationship diminishes when the emergency that motivated the maintenance is past. The calls had not diminished because Patricia did not love me. They had diminished because the calls were maintenance rather than relationship, and the maintenance had been oriented by the specific question of what I needed rather than by the question of who I was. When the question of what I needed had become less urgent, the calls had become less frequent. This is not the pattern of someone who loves you. It is the pattern of someone who is managing you. The Monday afternoon kitchen conversation was the confirmation of what the preceding 5 years had been showing me. Raymond Reyes died on a Tuesday in November 2018. He was 74 years old, and the manner of his death was the manner of his life. He was in the garden doing what he did on Tuesday mornings in November, which was preparing the beds for winter. He had a cardiac event that was swift and without warning, and the neighbor who was walking past the fence found him. The neighbor's name is Carol Hutchins, and she has been my neighbor since 1994. And she called 911, and she called me, and she stayed with Raymond until the ambulance came. Carol is the person who told me that Raymond was already gone when she found him, that he had not suffered, or not visibly suffered, and that the garden looked like he had been working carefully, which is how he always worked. I tell you about Raymond and about Carol because they are both relevant to the plan. Raymond is relevant because the house and the assets that Gregory and Patricia argued about over my body were the things that Raymond and I had built together across 43 years of marriage, and the question of where they should go is should go. It's a question about what Raymond would have wanted as much as it is a question about what I want. Carol is relevant because she is the person I called in April when I needed someone to help me with specific tasks. And she helped me without asking why. The house has been the house at 1847 Elmwood Drive since Raymond and I purchased it in 1979. We purchased it with the specific savings of a school principal and an electrician who had been living carefully for the first 9 years of their marriage. And the purchase was the specific American transaction of two people who have worked and saved and who are claiming the thing they worked and saved for. The house has been maintained across 44 years with the attention that Raymond brought to everything he maintained. Properly, consistently, with the understanding that maintenance is what keeps things worth having. Raymond was an electrician for 37 years. He worked for a small electrical contracting company for the first decade, and then opened his own company, which he ran until retirement in 2010. The company was never large, 4 or 5 employees at its peak, the kind of operation that depends on its owner's reputation and the owner's willingness to show up and do the work correctly. Raymond's reputation was what his work deserved. He was the electrician that people called when they wanted it done correctly the first time. He had taught both children, when they were adolescents, the specific things he believed every person should know about the house they live in, where the circuit breakers were, how to reset them, what a GFCI outlet was, and how to reset it. Identify the signs of an electrical problem before the problem became an emergency. He had taught Gregory and Patricia not because he expected them to become electricians, but because he believed that understanding the house you live in is part of taking responsibility for it. I thought about this in June, when the house sale was closing, and when the young teachers, Melissa and David, who teach 3rd grade and 7th grade respectively, were signing the papers across the table from me in Susan's office. I thought Raymond would have shown them the circuit breaker panel. He would have explained the GFCI outlets. He would have given them the name of the plumber he trusted. I gave them the name of the plumber. I gave them the name of the HVAC company and the landscaper who had been doing the yard, since Raymond could no longer do it himself. I gave them what I could give them, which was the accumulated knowledge of 44 years of living in a specific house and understanding its specific systems. The house is worth more now than it was in 1979 by a multiple that seems improbable, but is the simple product of time and real estate market appreciation in a neighborhood that has, across 44 years, gone from the kind of neighborhood that working-class families lived in to the kind of neighborhood that young professionals with good incomes want to be in. The appreciation is not something I did. It is the product of time and market. Gregory's Monday afternoon assessment of the market timing was accurate as it happens. He is a project manager and he pays attention to the relevant factors. The factor he was not paying attention to on Monday afternoon was the one that made his assessment irrelevant. The house was no longer mine to sell by the time he was assessing its market timing. I had sold it in June. I'm going to be specific about the sequence of April, May, and June, because the specificity is what makes the plan legible as a plan, rather than as a series of impulse decisions. April, I called my attorney. Her name is Susan Kimura, and she had been my attorney since Raymond and I revised our estate documents in 2015. And she is the kind of attorney who listens to what you are saying rather than to what she expects you to say. I told her what Dr. Venkata had told me. I told her what I wanted to do. She listened for 40 minutes, and then she said, "I can do everything you've described. Some of it will take time. How much time do we have?" I told her what Dr. Venkata had said about the timeline. She said, "Then we start tomorrow, April and May." Susan prepared the documents I had described to her. The first document was a trust, the Helen Pemberton Reyes Trust, established for the benefit of the Sunrise Children's Home, which is the children's home in the city that I had been a board member of for 11 years, and that I had chosen before April because I had already been choosing it for 11 years, and because the choosing was not impulsive, but considered. The trust was structured to receive a specific asset in a specific form, which I will describe in the June section. The preparation of the documents took longer than I had expected, not because of any difficulty with the legal work, but because Susan insisted on reviewing every provision multiple times, and because I agreed that the reviewing was warranted. The documents were going to be the final expression of my intentions, and the final legal instrument of my life, and the precision required by that finality was not the precision of ordinary transactions. We revised 3 times. Each revision produced a better document. I also, during this period, made a decision that I had been deferring for several years. I called my accountant, and I reviewed the financial picture with complete honesty. The complete honesty included the question of the debts, Gregory's mortgage co-signature and Patricia's car loan, and what would happen to those obligations when I died and my estate was, as I was planning it to be, without assets. My accountant told me what I already knew. The obligations would survive my death in the specific form of claims against the estate, and if the estate had insufficient assets, the co-signed parties would bear the obligations themselves. He said, "Helen, are you sure about this? The debts, I said, are a consequence of commitments I made freely. The commitments were made for good reasons. The consequences are what they are." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay, I want you to confirm in writing that you've received this information and that you understand it." I signed the confirmation. It is with Susan's file. May. I began the process of converting my investment accounts, the accounts that Gregory and Patricia had not known the balance of, but that Patricia had been checking, to a form that could be transferred to the trust. The investment accounts were held in brokerage accounts that I had maintained since Raymond died, and the balances were the accumulated result of 40 years of savings and Raymond's insurance payout, and the careful management of a woman who had spent 28 years managing institutional budgets. The conversion process required a specific technology decision, which I made in May after research and consultation with a younger colleague from the school board, who understood these things. I converted approximately 2/3 of the investment accounts to Bitcoin. This is not the decision of an impulsive person or of someone who did not understand what they were doing. It is the decision of a person who had identified the specific properties of the asset that made it appropriate for the specific transfer she was planning. It can be stored as a code string. It is transferable without institutional intermediary, and it is not a property subject to probate. The Bitcoin was transferred in June to a cold wallet, whose private key, the code string that provides access, was given to the executive director of the Sunrise Children's Home, Lydia Park, in a sealed envelope with written instructions about what it was and how to access it. I told Lydia what I was giving her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Helen, the home needs a new facility," I said. "Susan has the documents. When I'm gone, she'll contact you." June? The house. I sold it to a young couple, teachers, a fact that I found appropriate given my own career, for the fair market price that the listing produced. I rented it back from them, with their agreement, under a lease that allowed me to remain in residence until my death. The lease payments were modest, and the agreement was specific. I could stay in the house until I died, And when I died, the tenancy ended and the house was theirs. I had lived in this house for 44 years. The young teachers would live in it for the next 40 years. This seemed right. After the sale, I moved the proceeds into the remaining accounts, and the remaining accounts into the trust. By the 1st of July, there was nothing left that was subject to probate. The house was sold. The investment accounts were in the trust. The Bitcoin was with Lydia Park. What remained was the bank account at Riverside Bank, which Patricia had been checking. The balance in that account by July was $1,400. The will that Susan deposited at Riverside Bank's safe deposit box in July was the will I have described. It was a valid legal document, signed and witnessed and notarized and dated. It was also as the document that the bank would provide to my children when the time came, a document that they would open expecting to find their inheritance inside it. What they would find instead was a blank sheet of paper. I want to explain this carefully, because the blank sheet of paper is not what it will appear to be on first encounter. The will, the actual legal will, was also in the envelope. Susan had ensured that the legal document was present and valid, and that all the formal requirements were met. But the will's operative provisions, the part that people think of when they think of a will, directed everything to the trust. The blank sheet was additional, placed in the envelope on my instruction, as the specific and wordless statement that I have been unable to make verbally. I am a woman who has been asked, repeatedly across the years, to speak when I would rather be silent, to explain when the explanation should not be necessary, to justify when the justification should be apparent to anyone paying attention. The blank sheet is the statement of someone who has run out of words to say to people who have not heard the words she has already said. It says, "There is nothing to say, because everything that was worth saying was said across 78 years of a life, and the people who did not hear it will not hear it better from a page of text after I am gone." It says, "I leave nothing to those who did not consider me family while I was alive," because family is not a legal category. It is a behavioral one. It says most directly, "I was in this bed, breathing, hearing every word, and what you said was not what you say to someone you love." The blank sheet will communicate all of this without a word, which is the appropriate form for a statement, by someone whose silence was called a corpse's silence. 28 years as a school principal is 28 years of understanding what institutions are for, and what they are not for, and what the people inside them deserve, and what they have settled for, and what the difference between the two looks like when you are paying attention. I became a principal in 1987 at 42 years old, when the district decided that the Jefferson Elementary School required specific leadership, and when several people who knew my work as a teacher and then as a curriculum director suggested that the leadership was mine to provide, I was not sure. The principalship is a different job from teaching, and the difference is not only in scale, it is in the specific nature of the accountability, which as a principal is everywhere and simultaneous rather than bounded by the walls of a classroom. I was sure after the first year. The first year was hard in the specific way that first years are hard. The learning of the institution's character, the assessment of the staff's individual capacities and needs, the establishment of the authority that the role requires without the rigidity that authority sometimes produces. I learned all of this in the first year, and I learned it through the specific mechanism of paying attention, which is what I have always done, and what the principalship requires, the sustained systematic attention to what is actually happening in a complex organization versus what the organization's reports say is happening. The specific lesson of the 28 years that is most relevant to the plan is this: institutions exist to serve people, and when an institution stops serving the people it was built for, it has failed its purpose regardless of how well it maintains its own structure. A school that is well administered but fails to educate children has failed. An estate that is well documented but benefits people who did not behave as family has failed. The estate was mine to structure. I structured it to serve the people it should serve. This capacity transferred. It transferred to the board work at Sunrise Children's Home, which I joined in 2012 after my retirement, and which gave me the specific opportunity to apply the institutional understanding to a different institution with a different population of people who needed to be served. The children at Sunrise needed things that children's institutions often do not provide well. Continuity, or rather than the cases they represent. I had spent 11 years on the Sunrise Board trying to ensure that the institution provided these things. I had sat through budget meetings and program reviews and personnel decisions, and the specific recurring challenge of running a program that depends on the generosity of people who do not have to be generous. The transfer to Sunrise was Solomon's money, finally doing what Solomon had asked it to do. And it was the product of 28 years of understanding what institutions need to be for the people they serve. Carol Hutchins is 68 years old, and she has lived next door since 1994. And she is the person who found Raymond in the garden, and who has been in the years since, the person who brings soup when I am ill, and who calls to check in without being asked, and who has, across nearly 30 years of proximity, become the specific kind of friend that propinquity produces when both parties are paying attention to each other. I called Carol in April, the week after Susan and I had our first meeting. I told her what Dr. Venkata had told me. Carol was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, what do you need?" This is the question I had needed to hear, and had not heard from Gregory or Patricia in the months before the diagnosis, when the earlier illnesses had produced smaller versions of the same need. What do you need? Not what are your plans. Not who are you going to leave the money to, not say something. What do you need? I told Carol what I needed. The needs were specific and practical. I needed help with certain aspects of the house management that had become difficult. I needed a driver for the appointments that I was attending more frequently. I needed, on some evenings, company that was present without being demanding. Carol provided all three across the months from April to the present. She drove me to Susan's office in May. She drove me to Riverside Bank in July when I deposited the envelope. She has been at the kitchen table for dinner most Thursdays, which is what we had established as the Thursday ritual 2 years after Raymond died, and which has continued as the world around it changed. She knows about the plan. I told her in June, when the house sale was complete, and when the trust documents were signed. She listened to the full account, and she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "And the children, what happens to them?" "They inherit the Riverside Bank account," I said, "which currently has $1,400 in it. And the debts, which are the mortgage on Gregory's house, Raymond and I co-signed for it, which means I have an obligation on it. And when I die, the obligation will be called, and the loan that Patricia took out for her car, which I also co-signed. The debts are larger than $1,400 by a significant amount." Carol was quiet again. Then she said, "Are you sure, Helen?" "Yes," I said. "Because once it's done," I said. "It will have been done." That's the nature of decisions that are made completely. The time to be unsure is before, not after. I have been sure since April. She nodded. She stayed for dinner. She has not said anything about it again. She brings soup, and she drives me to appointments, and she comes for Thursday dinner. And the plan is the plan, and she understands the plan, and we do not need to talk about it. I want to explain the debts, because the debts are the specific mechanism by which the plan produces its sharpest consequence, and the sharpness requires understanding. Gregory's house in Cincinnati was purchased in 2019, the year after Raymond died. Gregory had been renting until then, and the combination of the circumstances, the inheritance from his father, the desire to establish stability in his mid-40s, had produced the decision to buy. The house he bought exceeded what his income alone could support in terms of the mortgage qualification, and he had asked Raymond and me to co-sign the mortgage. We had co-signed. Raymond was alive when Gregory asked, and Raymond's response to his children's needs was Raymond's response. Generous, without the calculation of what the generosity might cost. Organized by the principle that a parent helps their children when the parent helps their children. Children need help. The co-signature means that when I die, the bank's obligation runs to my estate. If my estate has nothing, which it will not, the bank will pursue Gregory for the full obligation, including the portion that would have been covered by my estate in a scenario where my estate had assets. Gregory will have to refinance on his own, which at his current income and at the current interest rate environment will be significantly more expensive than the current mortgage. Or he will have to sell. Patricia's car loan is smaller but similarly structured. I had co-signed in 2021 when she was in a period of credit difficulty and when she had asked with the specific directness of a person who knows what she needs and who believes that asking is appropriate. I had agreed. The agreement had been reasonable in the moment and remains reasonable in principle. The specific consequence of the agreement in the context of my death and an estate that contains nothing is that Patricia's loan will be called and she will need to refinance on her own terms. The total of the two obligations is approximately 4 times the balance in the Riverside bank account. I have known this since June. I thought about it carefully in June because the specific mechanism of the debts as consequence is the mechanism that tips from education into punishment, and I had to be certain about the line. The line is the same line that exists in any just consequence. Was the consequence proportionate to the action? And was the action that produced the consequence the party's own action? The action was the Monday afternoon kitchen conversation, and the more specific action was the 5 years of gradual withdrawal. And the most specific action was the deathbed argument about the assets of a woman who was still alive and still hearing. The consequence is that the assets they argued about are not there, and the debts they did not think about are. This is proportionate. The calculation is complete. I want to tell you about Sunrise, because Sunrise is where the plan goes rather than simply where it does not go, and the going toward is more important than the going away from. Sunrise Children's Home was established in 1971 and serves children in the foster system who have specific needs that make family placement difficult or impossible. Children with complex medical needs, children who have experienced significant trauma, children who are at the age range where foster placement becomes statistically unlikely, and who need institutional support that is genuinely supportive rather than merely custodial. I joined the board in 2012. 3 years after my retirement, and 1 year before the specific funding crisis that almost closed the home. The funding crisis was resolved. It is always resolved in these institutions through the combination of emergency fundraising and program reduction, and the specific heroism of staff who continue to show up despite delayed paychecks. The resolution was not comfortable, and the home has been in a state of managed scarcity since 2013. Doing the work it does with the resources it has, which are not the resources the work deserves. I want to tell you about the children at Sunrise because the plan is for them, and they deserve to be in this account rather than just as the destination of a financial transfer. There is a girl named Amara who is 14 and who has been at Sunrise since she was 9. She has a memory for numbers that is specific and unusual. She can tell you the population of any American city, the dates of any historical event you ask about, the batting averages of every player on the current roster of the local baseball team. She is also not able to sit through a meal without assistance because the sensory processing disorder that makes large gatherings difficult for her requires specific support. Amara needs a setting that understands both the extraordinary and the difficult, and Sunrise has been that setting for 5 years because the staff have come to know her well enough to provide both. There is a boy named Marcus who is 7 and who came to Sunrise 8 months ago from a situation that the board discussed in terms carefully designed, not to communicate the specific details, but that communicated to anyone on the board who was paying attention that the situation had been very bad. Marcus does not speak much, but he draws. And the drawings are the drawings of a child who is processing enormous amounts of experience through the only channel that feels safe. The new facility will have an art room that the current Victorian does not have space for. I have been on the board for 11 years, and I have learned about individual children in the way that a board member learns about them. Not with the daily intimacy of a caregiver, but with the responsible for the institution that serves them. Amara and Marcus and the 37 other children currently at Sunrise are not abstractions to me. They are the reason the trust exists and the reason the Bitcoin private key is in Lydia Park's safe. The new facility that I mentioned to Lydia Park is the facility that the home has been planning for 11 years. A building that would allow the home to serve more children and to serve them in spaces designed for children, rather than in the converted Victorian that has been the home's location since 1971. And that has the specific inadequacies of a Victorian converted to institutional use: the narrow hallways, the insufficient bathrooms, the heating system that is always doing something. That makes noise. The Bitcoin, when Lydia Park accesses the wallet with the private key I gave her, will be worth what it is worth at the time she accesses it, which is not something I can know as I write this. I know what I deposited. I know the general principle of its appreciation over time. I know that the amount is sufficient, at any reasonable estimate, to fund a significant portion of the facility project, and that, combined with the investment accounts in the trust, which will be accessible through the formal trust process after my death, the total should be the facility project's primary funding. This is what Raymond's years of work and my years of work and the 40 years of careful management should produce. A building where children who have no family can live in spaces designed for them, with the specific dignity that design spaces provide. My children argued about the assets at my bedside. My assets built a home for children who have no one to argue about them. I am at peace with the comparison. I have been a quiet person for most of my life. Not timid. I spent 28 years managing a school, and quiet people who are timid do not manage schools. Quiet in the sense of someone who chooses her words with care, who does not speak when speaking would not add to what needs to be said, who has always believed that the quality of a communication matters more than its frequency. Raymond understood this. He had been the same, a man who spoke when he had something to say and who did not speak to fill the silence. In the early years of our marriage, before we had come to know each other completely, the silence between us sometimes felt like a problem, like there was something we were failing to communicate. Later, it became the specific comfort of two people who have learned that the other's silence is not absence but presence in a different form. We could be quiet together for an entire evening, and the evening would be full rather than empty. Gregory and Patricia had not inherited this quality from either of us, which is the specific mystery of inheritance. How the children of two quiet people can produce children who fill every available space with words. From the time they were small, they had been talkers, energetic, verbal, the kind of children who process everything aloud. This had been a charm of their childhoods and a specific texture of our family life. The way that the dinner table had always been loud and the car rides had always been full of conversation. The charm of the childhood talking became, in adulthood, the specific quality I've been describing. The management of situations through words, the filling of uncomfortable silences with noise rather than with the patience. Sometimes deserves. The Monday afternoon question, "Don't be silent like a corpse," was the most extreme expression of this, but it was also the most honest. It said clearly that my silence was something they could not tolerate, and that they would rather I speak than be quiet, regardless of what speaking would produce. Gregory and Patricia have always found my silence difficult. They have found it difficult in the way of people who use words to manage their environments, who talk to fill the space where understanding hasn't arrived yet, who explain things to make them feel explained whether or not the explanation is necessary, who ask questions as a form of control rather than as a genuine request for information. The Monday afternoon question, "Who are you going to leave the money to? Don't be silent like a corpse," was the most extreme version of this difficulty. The extreme version is what happens when the management through words approach reaches a situation that it cannot manage. A dying mother who is not speaking. The silence was the thing that Gregory could not tolerate, and the intolerance produced the sentence. What I want to say about the silence, for whoever reads this, is that the silence was never emptiness. Silence is not the absence of thought. Silence is the presence of thought that has not been converted to sound. And the thought that I have been having across the weeks and months of the plan's execution has been specific and complete and does not require words to be what it is. I thought about Gregory and Patricia's childhoods, which were real and full of the specific moments that comprise a childhood. The first day of school, the skinned knee, the argument about the curfew, the graduation ceremony, the moments were real. The love that attended them was real. The love that attends the memory of them is real. The love is not the same thing as what they deserve from me now. These are different questions, and the difference is the thing that the deathbed argument makes visible. What someone deserves from your estate is not a function of how much you love them. It is a function of who they have been in the relationship and what the relationship has contained. The relationship I had with Gregory and Patricia contained real love and also real absence, and the balance of the relationship, weighed across the years of my widowhood, and particularly across the 5 years that preceded the diagnosis, was a balance that pointed somewhere other than them. The silence at my bedside was the silence of a woman who had already done her speaking, in the form of a plan executed across 8 months, and who had no further words to add. I am writing this in the quiet of an evening in late autumn. The room is the room it has been since 1979. Curtains are the curtains I chose in 1984, which Raymond said were too expensive, and which I said were the right ones, and which have been the right ones across 40 years of looking at them. The light from the window is the light that comes through those curtains in the late afternoon, which is the specific amber of autumn afternoons in this part of the country, the light that tells you something is ending, and something else is not yet clear. The room looks the way it looks when one person has been living in it for 30 years. The specific accumulation of objects that are there because they have always been there. Not displayed, but simply present, each with its own history of arrival and remaining. Raymond's reading glasses are on the nightstand because they have been on the nightstand since 2018, and I have not moved them, and I will not move them. There is a photograph on the dresser of Raymond and me at Patricia's wedding, which was in 2009, the year after I had become a widow, and the year when the children's lives were full of their own events, and there was less occasion for me to feel the weight of the house. In the photograph, Raymond and I are standing in front of a tree that was full of leaves, and the leaves are the specific gold of a late afternoon. In October, the same gold as the curtain's light. Carol will come tomorrow. She will bring the soup that I can still eat, and she will sit with me, and we will talk about the things that two women of our age talk about when they have been neighbors and friends for nearly 30 years. The neighborhood, the news, the specific small events of daily life that constitute the texture of a life when the larger events have mostly been resolved. Susan will come on Friday. She does this regularly now, the attorney who checks in on the client, which is unusual and which is, I think, an expression of something more than professional obligation. She will confirm that everything is in order, which it is, and we will have tea, which has become the ritual that frames the conversations about the plan. Gregory called last week. The call was a check-in, which is what he calls when he wants to call without having anything specific to say. I answered, and I spoke to him in the way that I have always spoken to him, with the warmth that is genuine, and with the silence where silence is appropriate. He did not ask about the assets. He did not mention the house. He asked how I was feeling, and I told him. And the conversation was what it was. A son calling his mother, who is dying and not quite knowing what to say. I said, "I'm all right, Gregory. I'm where I want to be, and I've done what I needed to do." He said, "That's good, Mom. That's good." He did not know what I meant by what I needed to do. He will know when Susan opens the envelope. Patricia has not called in 2 weeks. This is consistent with the pattern. The calls diminish when the situation is not acute. It will become acute when I am gone and the envelope is opened, and then the calls will begin again, and then the calls will stop when she understands what the envelope means. I am at peace with all of this. The plan is done. The Sunrise Children's Home has the private key and the trust documents and the promise of the facility that will be built. The young teachers have the house. The Thursday dinners continue. The curtains are the right ones. There is nothing left to do except the last thing, which is not something that can be done. It simply happens. The blank page will be read after I am gone, which means I cannot be present for the reading. I cannot see their faces when Susan opens the envelope. I cannot hear what they say to each other in the room where the reading happens. The blank page will have to speak for itself, which it is equipped to do. The blank page, in the context of a will reading, says everything it needs to say by being blank. The expectation of text produces the specific impact of its absence. People who come to a will reading expecting to find their names in the text experience the blank page as the most specific of rejections, not a rejection of something offered. The assumption was the problem. The blank page addresses the assumption. I have tried, in this account, to be honest about all of it. About Gregory and Patricia's failures, which are real, and about my own failures, which are also real. I failed to maintain the closeness that the 5 years of my widowhood required, in part because the closeness requires two parties, and in part because I am someone who does not press when the pressing is not wanted, and who retreats to the silence. That is comfortable for me when the speaking seems to fall on unprepared ground. The failures are mutual. The consequence is not mutual because consequences rarely distribute themselves proportionately across all the parties who contributed to the situation that produced them. The consequence, in this case, falls where it falls. What do I know? At 78 in the amber light of the autumn afternoon, with the curtains that were the right ones and the soup that Carol will bring tomorrow. I know that family is a practice rather than a status. You do not inherit family membership by being born into a family. You earn it by the specific, daily, unremarkable practice of showing up when you are not needed as much as when you are, of asking what someone needs rather than what someone has, of being present to who a person is rather than to what they are worth. Carol is family. Lydia Park and the staff at Sunrise are family. The young teachers who will live in my house for the next 40 years will become, in ways they do not yet know. It is the specific form of communication available to someone who has run out of words and who has found a different instrument. The plan was executed in near total silence over 8 months, and the plan will speak when I cannot. I know that what you build for other people is more durable than what you build for yourself. The house I built with Raymond was for us, and it has served its purpose, and now it will serve someone else. The practice and the attention I gave to Sunrise's board for 11 years was for the children, and it will continue to be for the children, more substantially now than before. The plan was for the children of Sunrise, and for Carol, and for the memory of Raymond, and for the specific statement that a blank page makes to people who expected to find themselves written there. And I know that the cruelest punishment is often the silence, not because silence is cruel, but because the people who cannot bear silence have spent their lives filling it with noise rather than with substance, and the silence, arriving after the death of the person who could have been its substance, reveals the emptiness underneath all the noise. A blank page will be cruel in this way. I did not intend cruelty. I intended honesty, which is the only thing I have ever intended, and which has the quality it has. The curtains are the right ones. The soup will come tomorrow. This is enough.